11. Nathaniel Mangram. Nathaniel Mangram was celebrating his 31st birthday at a bar and lounge in Wilmington, Delaware in 2016, when Tyron Griffin took the DJ's microphone to offer a birthday shout-out. Griffin then shot Mangram and his friend, Kaveh Talbot. Mangram died from his injuries, but Talbot survived 2 gunshot wounds. During Griffin's trial murder, Talbot testified that he and Mangram went to the bar knowing Griffin would be there. There was tension between the two parties over a past issue, and Talbot tried to aggressively confront Griffin earlier on in the night, but said that Mangram held him back. Security also intervened, and Talbot let the matter go for the time being. But when Griffin took the mic to wish Mangram a happy birthday, Talbot said he knew it wasn't a normal birthday gesture. As soon as gunfire began, everyone inside the building rushed toward the exit. After they cleared out, the bartender found Mangram bleeding on the floor from his head and abdomen wounds. Griffin turned himself in 5 months after the shooting. He managed to avoid a first-degree attempted murder conviction and was instead found guilty of manslaughter, reckless endangerment, and weapons-related charges. This would normally come with a lighter sentence than a murder conviction, but Griffin received a 90-year term under Delaware's habitual offender law. Have you ever gone somewhere looking for drama with a certain person who you knew it would be best to avoid? Let us know in the comments below, but hit that subscribe button first. 10. Coy Wayne Westbrook. After going through a divorce in 1997, Coy Wayne Westbrook held on to the hope that his ex-wife Gloria Jean Coons would become open to rekindling the relationship. One night, Gloria invited him to her house in Channelview, Texas, for what he thought would be an opportunity to reconcile. He went over there, hoping they'd fall in love all over again. But he arrived to find a party going on and was met with guests who immediately told him that Gloria had just slept with another man in her bedroom, and they seemed to enjoy delivering the painful news to the heartbroken man. Later on that evening, Westbrook reportedly entered Gloria's bedroom and saw her going at it with 2 men. Guests continued to mock him, at one point even hiding his car keys so he couldn't leave. After finding the keys, he left the party, only to return a little while later with a loaded hunting rifle. This somehow failed to scare the partygoers at first, but as they continued to pick on Westbrook, he opened fire, killing 5 people in less than a minute. A neighbor overheard the gunfire and went over to the house, where they observed the horrifying scene and dialed 911. Westbrook was still there when police arrived and took him into custody on suspicion of murder. During his trial, he admitted to killing the victims but claimed that it wasn't his intention to do so. He said he acted out of rage and lost self-control. As you can likely imagine, this narrative did little to garner the jury's sympathy, and Westbrook was sentenced to death by lethal injection. In his final statement before his execution in 2016, he apologized for his actions and for the pain he caused to the victims' families. 9. Danielle, Imbimbo, and Richard Patron. What started as a fun night out in Philadelphia for Danielle, Imbimbo, and Richard Patron ended in a baffling mystery that persists to this day. The couple, who were in their mid-30s at the time, had known each other since their teens and reconnected in 2005. At the time, Danielle was separated from her husband, and the new relationship's future was uncertain. But when Richard called her up and invited her out for dinner, drinks, and live music with him and some friends one evening, she took him up on the offer. The pair were last seen leaving a bar at around 11:30 p.m. with plans for Richard to drive Danielle home. Sparks had flown between the pair, and they'd already started to plan their next date. But nobody saw or heard from them ever again, and Richard's pickup truck also mysteriously vanished. When Danielle's estranged husband came by to drop off their son and she wasn't home, her family knew something was terribly wrong. Richard's relatives were also concerned because it was unlike him to remain out of touch for so long. The families immediately kicked the search into high gear, covering a 100-mile area in every direction from the couple's last known whereabouts. They even hired a helicopter to scour the area for any sign of them. toll camera footage revealed that Richard's truck hadn't traveled on any major bridges or roadways, and not a single trace of him or Danielle ever turned up. Carjackings are common in Philadelphia, but the FBI found no evidence that this was likely to be the case. And based on the route the pair would have taken to reach Danielle's home, it seems unlikely that Richard accidentally drove into the Delaware River. In 2014, nearly a decade after they went missing, authorities conceded that they believe foul play was involved. As FBI Special Agent Vito Roselli pointed out, making two people and a truck vanish without a trace would have taken methodical planning. All signs point toward Richard and Danielle falling victim to a sophisticated murder-for-hire plot, but nobody seems to know who might have been behind it. The friends they went out with that night were eliminated as suspects, and Danielle's estranged husband Joe had an airtight alibi. And while Joe had a history of threatening Danielle and harassing Richard after finding out about the new relationship, no evidence of his involvement in the case has revealed itself. So if he was responsible in any way, he's managed to hide his tracks extremely well. More than 18 years later, investigators are left with more questions than answers and seem no closer to solving the case than they were on day one. 8. Michael McLean. 29-year-old Michael McLean was at a Nashua, New Hampshire nightclub with friends in 2019 when an altercation broke out between two women. According to initial reports, Michael knew the ladies and followed them outside as the disagreement spilled over into the parking lot. He then tried to de-escalate the fight as bystanders gathered. Other reports claim that Mike wasn't involved in the confrontation. Either way, the police showed up at some point and the crowd dispersed, but Michael was nowhere to be seen. His friends tried calling him and waited for nearly an hour before heading home at 1:45 a.m. 15 minutes later, Michael called his boss, who sometimes gave him rides home after nights out, and said, "They're after me, more than one." The man reportedly sounded panicked and out of breath. The call then disconnected, and his boss couldn't reach Michael when she tried calling him back. Around the same time, he sent a series of strange text messages to a neighbor. They read, "Help, lol, ah," "What stood aloof," and "Eldridge bro." Investigators believe he may have been trying to use voice-to-text dictation and that he was referencing Eldridge Street. Michael was seen on surveillance footage at a local McDonald's restaurant at around 2:30 a.m. and was then spotted on video near an apartment complex. About an hour later, he entered and exited a parking garage. It was the last known sighting of him, and nobody ever heard from him again. His bank accounts, phone, and social media have shown no activity. On the night Michael went missing, witnesses in the town of Hudson reported hearing screams for help from across the Merrimack River in Nashua. But a search of the river turned up no trace of the missing man, and his family believes it's unlikely that he drowned because he was a strong swimmer. His loved ones are also sure that he'd never purposefully disappear without telling them where he was going. 7. Brian Brimager and Yvonne Baldelli. Eager to start a new adventure, former U.S. Marine Brian Brimager and his girlfriend, Yvonne Baldelli, packed their belongings and moved from Southern California to Panama in 2011. They stayed at a hostel on a small island called Isla Carnero without a solid plan for the future, but they were content to see where life would take them. Yvonne seemed genuinely thrilled with Panama in the email she sent to her family, which described early morning runs on the beach, swimming in the ocean, and Brian's new gig playing guitar at local bars and restaurants. But within a few months of the couple's move, her loved ones began to hear less and less from her. At first, they wondered if Yvonne was just caught up in her new life in paradise, but they couldn't shake the underlying suspicion that something was wrong. They became convinced that Yvonne had been met with foul play when Brian returned to the US alone, claiming she'd run off to Costa Rica with another man. Not long after that, he got married to someone else, setting off even more alarm bells in the family's minds. The FBI learned from the couple's friends down in Panama that Brian had physically abused Yvonne. A few weeks after they arrived, people noticed on several occasions that Yvonne had facial injuries that she seemed to be trying to cover up. The feds also discovered that Brian had been in a relationship with his new wife for years, and they even had a child together. Yvonne apparently knew nothing of her boyfriend's secret life. Within days of arriving in Panama, Brian began emailing the woman, promising to return to the US and claiming that they would live happily ever after as a family. Further investigation revealed that the final emails Yvonne's family received were sent from California. Her laptop was found in Brian's apartment, indicating that he sent the emails in an attempt to make it seem like she was still alive. 2 years after Yvonne disappeared, a local resident found a duffel bag filled with her dismembered skeletal remains near the island shore. This was finally enough evidence for law enforcement to charge Brian Brimager with murder. Prosecutors argued that Yvonne found out about his double life and that he killed her to silence her. He pleaded guilty to the foreign murder of a US national and was sentenced to 26 years in prison, followed by 3 years of post-release supervision. Brian also admitted to destroying evidence, providing false statements to authorities, and impersonating Yvonne in the emails to her family. 6. Kyle Huff. After graduating high school and moving from Montana to Seattle in 2001, Kyle Huff and his twin brother, Kane, struggled to find their fitting on the social scene. Kyle began attending raves, where he was mostly a wallflower and didn't dance or interact much with the people around him. But he also wasn't causing any problems, so nobody seemed to mind his presence. That all changed though one night in 2006, when someone he knew from the rave scene invited him to an after party during the early morning hours. Everything went fine for a while, but then Kyle went out to his truck and retrieved several guns before heading back inside, massacring party guests along the way. As he entered the house, he reportedly said, "There's plenty for everyone." A nearby police officer overheard the gunfire and rushed to the scene, where Kyle had already claimed 6 victims out of the 30 or so people who were at the gathering. The big question surrounding the incident is why he chose to commit such a horrific act. But Kyle would never answer that question because he became a casualty of his own violence. If the police hadn't shown up when they did, it's likely that the killer would have continued shooting until he used up all 300 rounds of the ammunition that he was carrying. Witnesses who'd seen and spoken to Kyle before the incident were shocked. He showed no signs that he might become violent, and he had no identifiable reason to do so. Neighbors and his landlord described him and Kane as polite country music fans who seemed to live a normal and respectable lifestyle. To this day, it's unclear what made the young man snap, but there's certainly no doubt that he was more disturbed than he let on. 5. Edward and Stefania Andrews. One of the most baffling disappearances in Chicago history happened on the night of May 15, 1970, when Edward and Stefania Andrews attended a cocktail party at the Sheraton Hotel. The couple, who were in their early 60s, were planning to retire soon and seemed to be looking forward to the next chapter in their lives. At some point during the evening, partygoers noticed that Edward seemed ill. He'd felt unwell since lunchtime that day when he told his co-workers he felt sick. Edward apparently tried to tough it out at the party, but eventually told Stefania that he wanted to leave and get something to eat. The couple left at around 9:30 p.m., at which point the parking garage manager noticed that Edward was visibly stumbling. As they drove off, the manager observed Edward behind the wheel, while Stefania appeared to be crying in the passenger seat. The vehicle then sideswept a door and then illegally went south on a northbound street. When the couple failed to show up at their jobs the following Monday, their concerned co-workers alerted authorities. Newspapers were piled up outside the Andrews home, and the only things that appeared to be missing were any personal belongings they might have taken with them to the party. There was no activity on their credit or bank accounts, and robbery was quickly ruled out as a motive. Police theorized that Edward was disoriented and accidentally drove the car into the Chicago River, but numerous searches turned up no sign of the vehicle or the missing couple. In 1994, a police informant claimed that the Andrews were murdered by gangsters and that their car was submerged in a pond, but a search of the pond failed to turn up any evidence that this was the case. The pair were declared legally dead in 1978, and the case has been cold for decades. 4. Alexandra Dean. 23-year-old Alexandra Dean had just graduated from nursing school in 2016 when she attended a house party in Miami that attracted hundreds of guests. The annual event was advertised on social media as an epic gathering, like the bash in the Warner Brothers movie Project X. Sadly, things turned violent at some point in the evening when gunfire broke out, leaving Alexandra with a fatal bullet wound to the head. Investigators concluded that she was an innocent bystander and not the intended target of the shooting. No charges were brought against the homeowners, and the case still appears to be unsolved. Shortly after the tragedy, Alexandra's father called for justice for his daughter and for the perpetrator to be locked up for life. But sadly, nobody's come forward to help identify the suspect. 3. Ivana Vitsharak. One night during the summer of 2010, 19-year-old Ivana Vitsharak went to a club in the Polish city of Sopot with a friend named Adria and 3 young men that she'd known for about a month. At some point, an argument broke out among the group. Nobody knows what it was about, but surveillance footage captured Ivana running away from the club in a visibly upset state. As the sun rose a few hours later, Ivana called Adria to discuss the disagreement that had caused her to storm off. During the conversation, she said that she was heading to Adria's home and that she was a little drunk. Surveillance footage showed the young woman walking toward the neighborhood where Adria lived. When Ivana never showed up, Adria assumed she'd just gone home. But she never showed up there either, and her mum assumed she was at Adria's. Later that day, the 2 families realized she was missing, and sadly nobody's seen or heard from her since. In one of the security videos that showed Ivana walking, a man could be seen trailing behind her. Investigators eventually determined that they don't think he had anything to do with her disappearance. While Ivana herself has never been found, authorities finally made an arrest in the case in early 2023. After seizing evidence from the home of one of the men she was partying with at the club, known only as Powell P., investigators took him into custody. For now, they're remaining tight-lipped on the details of the case, which is being handled by a team that specializes in so-called unsolvable crimes. 2. Jacob Jarazowski. To celebrate his upcoming wedding in 2012, Jacob Jarazowski gathered with his buddies at a friend's house in Kansas City for his bachelor party. Sometime during the early morning hours, he got into an argument with one of the guests, and it escalated to physical blows. Police were called to the scene, where they found Jacob unresponsive on the floor. Unfortunately, he was declared dead at the scene. His friends were questioned by police, but no arrests were made. Authorities remained tight-lipped on the matter, and the exact cause of Jacob's death was never revealed, although the coroner determined that the manner of death was generalized blunt force trauma to the head and neck. At the time the story broke, investigators said that they were awaiting toxicology results and that they hadn't ruled out the possibility of filing criminal charges. But that never happened, and the story quickly went quiet in the media. 1. Music festival failure. In 2015, electronic music fans gathered in Chattahoochee Hills, Georgia for a Tomorrow World Festival, a spin-off of a highly successful Belgian event that until then had gone off without a hitch. This time was different though, and things were disastrous from the very beginning when heavy rain turned the concert grounds into a muddy mess and rendered access roads to the 8,000-acre site unusable. Further complicating things, the event's organizers limited shuttle service due to road conditions. Many attendees were left stranded, while others ended up sleeping on roadsides with no food or water. The only way to get back to civilization was to either hike 5 miles or pay for an Uber at 5 times the normal rate after hiking to a place that a car could actually get to. The next day, organizers announced that the rest of the festival's events would only be open to people who were camping on site. Most of the people who planned to attend weren't expecting to stay overnight, and while they were promised a refund, many attendees just wanted to see the show. Needless to say, that was the end of Tomorrow World in the United States. On top of the controversy the host company SFX faced for its poorly organized response to the weather in 2015, the company itself went into bankruptcy for various reasons the following year. Simply put, Tomorrow World just wasn't in the cards. And while it didn't receive nearly as much press coverage as the disastrous Fyre Fest in 2017, it was still widely criticized in the media as a failure of epic proportions. Have you ever attended a concert or event that was hyped up in the advertisement, but turned out to be a complete joke? Tell us about it in the comments below. Would you rather have your birthday shut down by the police right after it started, or have someone you dislike show up during a night out on the town just to be a thorn in your side? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.